thank you everybody for being patient. As you guys are seeing, I'm learning the technical side of Zoom today, so I really appreciate everybody being patient as we get started. And since my computer is not working and sharing, I will not share our intro deck. I just tell you guys a little bit about what's happening today. As you guys know, as the experts, we're going to be recording the session as we're able to put this video up on our YouTube channel so that other folks can see it that are not able to join us today. Additionally, we will go through some of the questions that you guys provided ahead of time. As you guys RSVP, many of you guys provided questions, and we're going to try to get to those as much as we can. Some of the questions that were added on the RSVP were questions more for health and wellness. So we will address those. We will forward those to Dr. Fox and have you guys get answers for you guys via email, or send you guys links to where you guys can find that information on our website. Okay, so today we're going to focus on whole school safety plans. So our guest today is the great Jadine Chou, Chief of Safety and Security for Chicago Public Schools. And I had an awesome slide where I was going to have your bio and introduce you. But Chief, if you can talk a little bit about yourself and let them know who you are before we get started with the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Bernice. And thank you to everyone who is joining us today live. And for those of you who are watching this on a recorded version, so excited to have you join me today to talk about our new efforts that we're calling the whole school safety planning process for schools. This is a big deal. Before I get into the presentation, I will just say a little bit about my background, just so you know. I've been with Chicago Public Schools for a little bit over 9 years. I've been the Chief of Safety and Security that entire time. Very happy to say that we've seen quite an evolution of how we see school safety. And I'm hoping that you will agree that this next step is really the right next step for how to ensure that our students feel safe and how our students feel welcome. And so with that, I'm going to enter into the presentation, and at the end of this, we will open it up to a question and answer session. So first of all, many of you have seen this, and let me just say, by the way, some of you who saw the board presentation, a lot of this will be review, but I'm hoping to add a little bit extra for those of you, so it's not 100% of a repeat. So I'd like to start out by talking about the CPS Strategic Plan. So as you know, we have what we call the Apple, and safety and security fall underneath the area of academic progress, because if students do not feel safe in schools, then it will take away from their ability to have enhanced learning. And so it's very important that we have a culture that provides safe and supportive schools to our students. Before we get into what the whole school safety plans is, I just want to give a little bit of background around where we've been over the last several years. So since school year 2012, we've worked very hard to dismantle the school to prison pipeline. We've moved away from zero tolerance in our disciplinary process. We've trained our staff on ensuring that we're moving away from punitive consequences. And through those efforts, we've seen a 91% reduction in out-of-school suspensions and an 87% reductions in expulsions. In addition, we've seen an 80% reduction in student arrests taking place at schools. This is significant, and it's a lot of progress, but it's not enough, because we know that unfortunately, even with this progress, we are still seeing these exclusionary disciplinary actions as disproportionately impacting our students of color. And so while we see tremendous progress, we still have a long way to go, and we're not going to stop until we fully eradicate these punitive consequences. As it pertains to school resource officers, which is going to tie into where we are with the whole school safety plans. School resource officers are the full-time uniformed police officers that are inside of CPS high schools, a set of them. So over the last 2 years, Chicago Public Schools asked local school councils at these high schools to vote on whether they wanted to keep the SRO program at their schools. So 2 years ago, we had 72 schools and 100% of them opted to keep their SRO program. Last summer, we had 72 schools and 55 of those high schools opted to keep the program. 17 opted to remove the program. And that shows that this is moving in that direction. We did get a lot of critique, which I'll talk about as we enter the new conversation around whole school safety plans. Some of the things that also happened last fall, though, is we were working with Chicago Police Department to improve the intergovernmental agreement addressing the school resource officer program. And so in conjunction with the consent decree with the Chicago Police Department, we added these improvements. First, we enhanced the eligibility and selection criteria, meaning that we asked CPD to only send us candidates who have excellent disciplinary history. In addition, this year, for the first time, principals can play a key role in the selection of their SROs, meaning if the school has the SRO program, the principals can participate in the interview process for the SROs that will be selected for their schools. Another very important improvement is that all SROs will be prohibited from using the Criminal Enterprise Information System, formerly known as the gang database. So all of the terminals that are in the schools will be removed or have been removed to prohibit them from accessing this database. In addition, we have an improved process for complaints. So in the past, people were able to call whoever they knew. So you'd call the commander, you would call 311, you would call COPA. Now we are asking for centralized intake through COPA, which stands for the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. And by putting it all through one point, we have a better way of tracking complaints related to our school resource officers. And in addition, COPA is going to create a special unit within their organization that will review SRO specific complaints. In addition, we're going to have improved training. And then lastly, compliance with welcoming city ordinances. So all of the SROs will be required to ensure that we are protecting students impacted by the welcoming school ordinances. If you were at our August board meeting in 2020, we had a new resolution. So this is part of the evolution of school safety at CPS. So essentially, in the past, CPS has historically used school resource officers, police officers, as part of its safety strategy. We understand, especially with all the feedback we've received from listening to parents and students, staff, community members, that there was a critical need to review and reimagine how we look at our safety in our schools. And that might mean further reducing or even eliminating the presence of the school resource officers in our buildings. And so as a result, the board asks CPS through this resolution to identify an inclusive way of seeking out alternatives that schools can consider as part of their safety plans in lieu of SROs. And so we took that very seriously. And so we engaged on a community-led process that would really attempt to seek out what our community members, our stakeholders are saying about safety in schools. We did an all call where we asked community-based organizations to apply to be a part of this process, to help us design a process to seek out this feedback from stakeholders. We had 15 CBOs apply. And of those 15, 5 were selected by a cross-functional steering committee that was made up of students, teachers, we had parents, we had principals, and a few others. I think we had an LSC member, and they selected these 5 organizations that you can see here. The Arc of St. Sabina, Build Chicago, Kofi Power Pack, which is a parent advocate group, MICVA Challenge, and Voice, which is a student advocate group. And I'm gonna there you go. And so it was great because we had two organizations that represented the student voice. We had one organization that represented the parent voice. And then we had one organization on the south side, one organization on the west side. And so through that, they hosted 18 community sessions. In addition, they had smaller sessions such as focus groups and interviews with stakeholders in their areas, reaching over 675 people, so 676 to be exact, to generate recommendations. In addition, I wanted to share that we are working with the CPS Office of Social Emotional Learning on the recently announced Healing Centered Initiative, HCI, which essentially is looking to have all of our schools really look at safety beyond just physical safety, but also through emotional safety and relational trust through a trauma-informed lens. What you see on the bottom right is our framework, which is physical safety, emotional safety, relational trust. But what's exciting is when we can take all three of those areas and transcend all three. And that is what we're seeking to do with a whole school safety view. These are the recommendations that the organizations came up with. And I hope a lot of them will seem very familiar to you because, again, this was built on the feedback that we received from community organizations, through stakeholders, through our interviews and focus groups. So the first one is implement holistic restorative practices. So what does that mean? That means looking at ways to ensure that it's not just like a peace room, but how do we imbue restorative culture throughout the entire school? Increase access to social emotional learning and mental health resources. How can we make sure that we have enough staff and the appropriate training so that the staff that we do have are able to support our students with these resources? Number three, create safe and welcoming physical school environments. We know that your physical environment impacts how you feel, how children feel welcomed when they walk into the building, and how they feel throughout the day based on the environment that they sit in during classes and on every activity. This was something that was called out again by the recommendations. Increase investments in student leadership and decision-making processes. So through all of this, if there's anything we wanted to spotlight, is the importance of whenever we talk about school safety in ensuring that we are elevating student voice, making sure that we're elevating student leadership as we make these decisions. Along those lines, we also want to increase authentic parent and community engagement opportunities. And so ensuring that we're not making these decisions in a vacuum, that we're also engaging parents and community stakeholders who are in our school communities as we make these safety decisions. Provide additional school level support for trauma-informed crisis intervention. So making sure that our schools have the protocols and the resources that they need and the training that they need to make sure that we are available for those trauma-informed situations, those trauma-related situations. And lastly, promote and enhance the behavioral health teams that we have in our schools. And where we do not have them, we should be developing them. Behavioral health teams are there to support our schools in making sure that our students feel supported. So that was phase one, coming up with the recommendations. A lot of questions are around what happens now. And that is where we enter into phase two. And so we looked at the phase one recommendation on a citywide level, and now we're going to take it to the school level. So when you think about those 55 remaining schools who have the school resource officer in their program, in early April, which is where we are now, we're asking these 55 schools to each form and launch their own school level whole school safety committees. These whole school safety committees then, during the month of April and May, will form analysis around available school data. And we are asking them to conduct additional school level engagement, especially engaging student voice in how do we see what we're doing with safety? How do we see how we're using our staff? And in that, the decision around what are we going to do with the SRO program. In May of 2021, schools then, from all of that feedback, from all of that analysis, will make a recommendation on a whole school safety plan that will essentially say, this is what we need at our school. These are the resources we need. These are the training we need. And here's what we're going to do with our SRO. This is what we're going to recommend to our local school council on what we're going to do with our SRO program. In June of 2021, that recommendation will go to the local school council. The one thing that I want to explain is these plans are resource affected. So one of the changes that we've made versus a year ago is that if your school does wish to turn in one SRO, they can do so. If they want to turn in both SROs, they can do so. And in exchange, what we're going to do is look at the programs that you've recommended and using a budget analysis based on an equitable resource allocation model, we will assess the available resources to fund those programs. It's not one for one. And so I want to emphasize that. We're going to try to be really open and clear about that. If the value of an SRO is X dollars, it doesn't mean that X dollars automatically goes to that school. Some schools will not need that because they already have resources available to their school for a variety of reasons that they already have available based on student-based budgeting, whatever it's based on. Some schools will need more than that because they have greater needs and they don't have the availability of resources. And so we're going to look at this holistically as a district, see what each school needs, and we're going to work that out in May. And then that is what will then go to the local school council. Additional support that we're going to have for schools during this is one of our community-based organizations partners, Voice, has stepped up to volunteer to create a youth-led district-wide training for those students who are on the whole school safety committees and also who sit on local school councils to help them through leadership development, advocate development, and self-governance and governance on the committees and councils that they sit on. In addition, all of our school safety committees will have access to subject matter experts from the Office of Social Emotional Learning, my office, the Office of Safety and Security, and our partners at the Office of Equity. So these teams can tap into their contacts in these departments, and we will be there to assist them. In addition, we are partnering with Dr. Masheri Keels from the University of Chicago. She oversees the Trauma Responsive Educational Practices Project. She has been very instrumental in helping us put together a series of protocols that will help these school committees come through their analysis on helping them to define what their whole school safety plan will look like. She and her team will be available throughout this process as subject matter experts as well. And then lastly, the 5 organizations from phase 1 have stepped up to offer to create a webinar that will be open to the public that will present their recommendations and a little bit more detail of what they saw and heard based on the feedback that they received during the phase 1 engagement. And with that, that is a summary, and I would like to turn it back to answer questions. And so I'm going to turn it over to Bernice.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. It's a lot of information with a lot of really good information. There's a lot of things that I didn't know. So thank you so much for that. As to our participants, the Q&A function is open. So if there's anything that you heard that you still have questions on, please feel free to start typing away in the Q&A function in Zoom, and we will try to get to those questions. What we're going to do now is actually go through some of the questions that were given to us through the RSVP. As you guys RSVP, there's an option to give us questions. So we're going to go through those first, and then we will try to get through the questions in the Q&A. So if you have questions, type them up in the Q&A. So Chief, to get started, we do have a question from Kelly from the National Association of Social Workers of Illinois chapter, the Illinois chapter. And her question is, what is a student to social worker ratio does CPS feel they need to start diverting kids from SORs to therapeutic interventions?
Yeah, and this is an important question in the context of resources, especially as we start to think about, again, what does a school need? And so it's my understanding, and I'm not an expert on the social worker field, but I will say in terms of providing student support, one of the things that we do know is it's important that we really look at how we're serving our students through social workers. So in the past, it's my understanding that we think of social workers in the context of having social workers available for students who need extra support, such as through an IEP. And we also know that the full student population might also need support from social workers. And so as we think about the whole school, this will mean a need for an increase in social workers for our school population. So it's not that there is a number of X number to every student, but it's really understanding sort of where we are, where the school is, on how their students use and need social work services. This is an opportunity as we look at what the school's current capacity is, what they've already have committed to them. This is an opportunity for each safety committee to look at that. I will say, and this has been put out there, and again, this is not exactly my area, but we do know that CPS has made incremental commitments to hiring additional social workers. And so we want to make sure that as we achieve those targets, as CPS is hiring those additional qualified social workers, that we are looking at that as part of our safety plans. So it doesn't, I'm not able, unfortunately, to answer that question exactly with a number of a ratio, but I do want to say that we do acknowledge that the social worker component is a very important part of this. It's not the only part though. And so some of the other recommendations that we look at, when we think about building a culture, when we think about training staff on trauma-informed a lens, when it looks about how we're creating a welcoming environment, that really impacts every adult in the building. And so I just want to make sure, social workers is absolutely one thing that we need to be looking at, but it's also really the whole picture, and that's why we call it a whole school safety plan.
Thank you, Chief. No, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you saying, right, like now that these committees are going to be formed in these schools, right, that they're going to look into the schools or the need of their particular schools. I think as you mentioned, and some of the other participants from other sessions have mentioned, each school is very different and the needs might be different. So amazing that these groups are going to be able to look at their schools and see what the need is for that specific school. So thank you for that, Chief. The next question, or several questions I have from a parent, Roberto from Jones. So his first question is, when are schools supposed to vote on the SORs?
Yeah. Hi, Roberto. I just want to say hello. Yes, so the safety committees will be working between now and May to develop the draft plan. The end of May is when we'll be refining with these safety committees what the budget feasibility looks like, so that in June, the local school councils will be able to vote. Between now and then, we are looking at engagement with the local school councils to make sure that we're giving them the support and ramp up so they know what to expect. So there will be more to follow in that engagement. Again, just based on the feedback we got last year, we want to make sure that we are helping our LSCs have the information they need to do the analysis that they need, and also make sure that the LSCs have the ability to do the engagement that they need to do to hear from their stakeholders. So the short answer is June, probably early June is what we're looking for, so that we can have this essentially decided for the school before you enter into your summer vacation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chief, for that. Two more questions from him. Let me ask the second one is, what guidance, support, and resources are CPS offering to an alternative approach to the SRO program?
So the resources that I already shared, I think, which, I don't need to say them again, but I think on top of that, something I really want to emphasize, we're really leaning on a lot of support based on our partners at the University of Chicago. We're working with the Office of Social Emotional Learning. I think it's really important that these resources are tapped into. One of the things I mentioned it really quickly with the Healing Centered Initiative, a lot of work is coming out of that. And I think that as that work essentially converges with this work, and we have a whole committee called within HCI called Whole School Safety. And so the work is together. We want to make sure that we're looking at it holistically. And so these resources are available to each LSC and to each whole school safety committee. Again, on an ongoing basis, we are there to support. We know that it still feels like it's not, you always want more time. This is the first time that we're looking at it this way for these 55 schools. And so the hope is that once we get through this, again, through the year, we can continue working with school safety committees and continue evaluating this and evolve this as we learn more of what went well, what didn't go well.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Chief, for that. And I think you touched a little bit on his third question, which is about budget, right? And the question is, will schools be able to relocate a significant portion of all the SRO funds to other health and wellness programs, such as Dean for students, health centers engagement, et cetera? So I think you touched a little bit. I don't know if you want to kind of say it again for us who sometimes forget.
Yes, so this is really a big part of this process this year that we did not have last year. Big part of this process is if a school wishes to essentially turn in or remove one of their SROs or both of their SROs, they will be able to look at alternate safety strategies to make up for that. What we're trying to do is to get to the root of the safety concern. So what is the root of your safety concern at your school? And what is the best solution to that? So we're trying to move away from the reactive, responsive, if this happens, I need a police officer there kind of thing, as opposed to what do we truly want to do to make sure that children feel safe and are safe? And a lot of that comes from having relationships with people they trust. It comes from having strategies that are more restorative and not punitive. These are the things that we really want to challenge all of us to think about as we're coming up with the strategies. It is, I mean, we do understand that there are some schools that may say, you know what, I'm not ready to go all the way. I might be ready to remove one SRO and keep one SRO. Those are the kind of things we want to talk through. But through the reflection and through the worksheets that we developed for the safety committees, we really want to have, that deep reflection so that it's not just this instinctive, I've always done it this way, so this is how I'm going to continue doing it. We really want schools to look at their data and say, what do we need to do to make sure that our students feel safe?
For sure. Thank you for that, Chief. I really appreciate it. The next questions that we have is Perrin Denise from Dirksen. And the question is, how does safety and security officers work with part-time CPD off-duty officers?
Yeah. So thank you for that question. The part-time off-duty officers are not considered school resource officers. So I just want to make sure that that is clarified. So at Chicago Public Schools, the school resource officers are those full-time uniformed officers that are detailed to the school, but they work for the Chicago Police Department. Separate from that, we have a cadre of officers that are called part-time police officers, part-time security officers who are off-duty police officers. These officers serve in the capacity as security officers, meaning they're part-time. They work for Chicago Public Schools. They're employed by the school, and they report solid line to the school. They're members of SEIU 73, just as are the full-time civilian security officers that support the school. They are not technically a part of the trade-in, but they are always, it's always been this way, where if a school does not need their off-duty part-time security officers, we will work with them to say, again, what do you need instead? Many times the benefit of the off-duties is that they have flexible hours. And so a lot of the off-duty police officers will come and support at dismissal, or they will come and support at maybe a nighttime sporting event, like a basketball game. And so there's some flexibility because they are off duty, where they can work sort of a special schedule that is not tied to a full-time schedule. I hope that if there's more to that question that the parent has, please send me a follow-up.
Will do. No, thank you for explaining that. I think it is confusing, right, to know. So thank you for explaining who gets hired by who works for who. That's very helpful. Thank you. The next questions that we have is from a parent, Jasmine from Thorpe Elementary. And her question is, why don't all schools get sub security when someone is absent?
Yes. So I'm not sure what the source of that question is in terms of if there was a problem. So I'll answer in the sense of sort of how it's supposed to work. And so many of our schools, you know, especially our elementary schools, we don't have a ton of security. So like if you're an elementary school and you have one security officer, and that security officer, let's say, has to call off because they don't feel well, they're sick, we will send a substitute security officer. So we have a cadre of substitutes that we call the flex team. There's only so many of them. And so it's sometimes we don't like to do this, but sometimes if we don't have a substitute available, we will not be able to accommodate the request. We do everything we can to try to move things around so that if a school needs coverage, that we will have coverage. If you have a particular situation that you're aware of, by all means, please let me know. Please email me so that we can look into that. We try very hard to accommodate the schools, but these flex team officers are specifically substitutes. They're trained and they go around the city to fill in where their security officers are absent.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And yeah, for Jasmine, if you have a particular concern, let us know. Everybody should have my email. If not, we can provide you that when we send the deck and the information from today's meeting. So thank you for that, Chief. The next question is from Ellen from one of the Noble schools. And the question is, what will Safe Passage look like for the fall?
Okay, so Safe Passage can be considered part of the whole school safety plan. Let me just say, you know, if someone has a concern with their dismissal and they don't have a Safe Passage at their school right now, like maybe you just need more adult presence. So we have community members who serve as Safe Passage. Before I answer that question, I'm going to just give a brief Safe Passage 101 for someone who may not know what Safe Passage is. So right now we have Safe Passage at 162 of our schools. It's a program that started in 2009, and it's a partnership with a set of community-based organizations who hire adults. They wear Safe Passage vests so you can identify them, and they stand on routes as children travel to and from school. They are there to be an adult presence if a child needs help. It's also there to give our students comfort and confidence that they can travel to school safely. These Safe Passage workers are extremely dedicated. You'll see them out there in all weathers, cold, raining. They are out there and they build relationships with their students. And so we know the students really rely on them. And that's why this question is so great, because what's going to happen when students return? Well, Safe Passage is already out there. And so for the elementary students who've already returned, our Safe Passage teams are out there supporting them. For the high school kids that are about to return, Safe Passage is already out there, again, getting into the motion, getting the community accustomed to their presence. Hey, remember us? We're the Safe Passage team that supports your school community, and really getting everyone back into that, you know, hoping to bring some sense of regularity and again, just predictability for our students. So the answer is, you know, they're back now. They'll be back there till the end of the school year, and then they'll definitely be back in the fall. So thank you for that question. And if you're at a school that does not have the Safe Passage program, please ask your leadership at the school administration, is this something that can be explored? We always want to look at adding new schools, you know, where possible, where budget is available. I want to be able to help you out if that's something that you believe your school will benefit from.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chief. Yeah, and I know when we visit schools, we always see the safe passage signs along the route, right? Where we know those folks are going to be. So if you haven't seen it, guys, be in the lookout when you're walking your kids or when you're driving, that there's some signs around the community that says safe passage. Just as a to look out when you're visiting the city or driving around. So thank you, Chief. The next question that we have is from a parent, Carmen, from Haley Elementary. And her question is, how well is the training that our school securities go through before they are hired and are able to handle students in schools?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. So a couple things about the security officers. So as I stated, all the security officers that are the full-time security officers are civilians. They work at the school, they're hired by the school, they report into school administration. These security officers, as of 2 years ago, are now centrally vetted before they're brought into the school. So what that means is there's a new hiring process where all the security officers have to come through the Office of Safety and Security first to make sure that they meet certain requirements. So we've really tried to increase the standards, improve the standards so that people coming into those roles want to support students, have the right mindset around student safety, non-punitive, supportive. That is what we're vetting on the front end. Once we vet those candidates, then we turn the list of candidates to the principal, and the principal and their team can then make the final selection. So they have the autonomy to choose from a pre-vetted set of candidates. The other benefit of doing it this way is that we know that everyone coming through can have the necessary training. And so we have a series of training programs that we would like all of our security officers to have, which again are supportive in nature for our students. So for example, one of them is the safety care training, which is how you de-escalate and build relationships with our students, making sure that if there is a need to intervene, what is the appropriate way for them to intervene. Another training that we do is implicit racial bias. We want to make sure that all of our security officers have a self-awareness and understand what to look for when it comes to identifying their own biases and addressing those biases, as well as identifying them in others to help try to mitigate the impact of those biases on our children. LGBTQ plus policies, they're also trained on that. And those are just some of the key ones. Like there's a few more that I'm leaving out right now, but there's a whole curriculum that we would like all of our security to go through so that they are equipped to make sure that they're taking care of our children. And again, in a supportive way, not in an enforcement type of way.
No, thank you, Chief, for that. And like you said, the ones that you mentioned are super important. So I can just imagine the process that you guys are putting these folks through to handle and be in the same space, right, as our kiddos. I know I have a 12-year-old, as everybody knows, because I mention them all the time, right? And we want to make sure that they're safe and that they trust the people that are there to take care of them. So I really appreciate that, Chief. We have another question from Maya from Blaine. And it's around the same phrase, but with safe passage folks. So that is CPS. Does CPS do background checks for the safe passage workers?
Yes. So yes, triple yes. All of our vendor staff and CPS direct employees that interface with children have to go through the CPS background check. You probably remember from a few years ago, we've centralized the background check process where in the past, the vendor staff were able to go through their own background check. So they had their own processes that they used. Starting in 2018, all of the vendor staff had to come through the CPS background check, which includes a fingerprint background check that covers FBI, Illinois State Police, Department of Children and Family Services check, and then a series of registries to make sure that the individual is safe to be in front of children. It is a very, I'll say, comprehensive check. We just recently automated the background check process. So As comprehensive as it is, we are trying to make sure that we are also doing these checks in a timely fashion. So as staff is coming through, that there is an efficiency on getting them staffed as quickly as possible, while also maintaining the integrity of the check. So the answer is absolutely. If you have any special concerns, again, please let Bernice or me know, so that we can look into it. But yes, everyone is required to go through the check.
Fantastic. No, thank you for that. And like all the things you were saying, I think that that's great that they're going through all those checkpoints, right? Different checkpoints. Because we know sometimes, things don't talk to each other. So you guys are double checking, triple checking. So that's checking. So that's really good. One of the other questions that Maya had, and I don't know if you would be able to answer this. I know it has to do with LSC and how LSCs sometimes make decisions. Her question is this: what do some LSC parents think it's okay to punish kids when wearing certain colors? Right. So I'm assuming we're talking about different gang colors or things like that. This is not an issue at her school, but she has seen this in some schools. So I don't know if, as you were talking about committees building to do right restorative practices, is that something that you guys are supporting LSCs?
Yeah, so we want to support LSCs. We want to support all parents in this conversation. It's complex, and I'm a lot older than a lot of people. I grew up in a time where there was no such thing as restorative justice. They didn't call it that. And if you did something wrong, it was automatic. You would get suspended, no question about it. Actually, even though I just said what I said, like I'm a lot older, and that it wasn't even that long ago, there's still some school districts that still do that punitive if you're for something you're wearing. CPS has really worked hard to move away from that, but there are still thoughts, mindsets where, well, if a young person does something wrong, yeah, they deserve to be punished. That mindset is something that we want to help talk through, because we don't subscribe to that. And we want to see if you are a parent who believes that, let's talk through what impact that might have on the child, your child or someone else's child. And so a few ways that we're looking to just have these conversations. We work very closely with one of the organizations that I mentioned, Kofi Power Pack. How do we do parent training around restorative practices? What does it mean? And let's hear from people about their concerns, and let's talk about how we can help evolve on that together. We're talking about working with Parent University, talking about having training for LSC members, and not just the parents.
Mhm.
It's many adults, let me just say. And so, just to be real candid about it, I don't know that everybody's on the same page on restorative justice. And so that's why we're trying to do this whole school safety, to get us more on the same page of research shows that the punitive consequences are not effective. And so let's look at other ways to get to the root of the situation, so that we have a more sustainable solution for our young people, and therefore impacting the safety of the school. We've learned so much over the years. Let's share that information, let's discuss it, and hopefully move together in a similar direction as we can, to get towards that objective of making sure our students feel welcome. So, I think that, just to close it out, like we've seen a lot, clothing, uniforms, and so forth. I think if we can really empower our young people to be the best they can be and not impact them again in a punitive way, I think so much of this will be better in so many ways, in terms of school safety. So I'm to the parent who asked that question, would love to talk with you offline about ways to discuss this at your school, with your LSC, with your principal, so that we can make sure that we're impacting that mindset that you described.
For sure. No, thank you, Chief, for that, and for your willingness to talk to our parents. We're submitting the questions. We really do appreciate that. And thank you for bringing the training for parents and community as a whole, right? Like you said, it's really important that it's everybody, the whole community, right, that's involved in really changing that mindset for the benefit of our kids. I really appreciate that. And I'm going to go through some of the Q&A that people have been typing away. One of the questions we have from Janet Tapia and is if a LSC votes to remove the SROs, if they voted to move the SROs last summer, can they still qualify for possibility of new resources for the next school year?
Great question, and I should have outlined it a little more explicitly. So as I stated, 17 high schools voted out their SROs last year. Because the LSCs voted them out, there isn't a need to vote again. Having said that, we worked last year with those 17 schools to look at their plans, to look at their resources, to say, what do you need? We did not have the incremental resources to open up or offer up last year. What we are talking about this year is we will be in conversations with these 17 schools in discussing what their needs are. The plans that we worked with you on last year, that we created with you, how will they suit now that we are returning back from COVID? Totally get that this whole last year we didn't get to test out the plans because we did not have in-person school. And so let's refresh them, look at them again. And if there is a gap, we don't want schools who voted them out last year to be disadvantaged. And so we want to make sure that we are looking at this from a district standpoint for all these schools, so that if there is a missing need that needs to be addressed, that they can be considered. Don't have the exact budget impacts for what that looks like, but we definitely do have the possibility to talk about how do we fill the gap for what they need to make sure their schools are safe, given that they've already voted out the SROs.
For sure. No, thank you for that. And Janet, thank you for your question. We have another question, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, Yana. So I'm sorry. And it says, how will the behavioral health team will support school safety committees to revamp the police alternatives?
Hey, Yana, great to see you. It's the same Yana. The behavioral health teams is a very important part of one of the recommendations that we laid out from the phase 1 of the whole school safety process. And so it is, from our standpoint, an extremely important part of dovetailing and making sure that they are being considered. So where a school has them, how do they fit in? What do they need to do their jobs right, to fit in with the whole school safety? As they're remapping police alternatives, is that process in place? So if a school, for example, removes their school resource officers, then if there is a situation, how can the availability and competency of this behavioral health team fit in to address the safety issue? And the safety issue might be, let's say, a situation where there's a crisis moment. That would not even be an SRO related situation, but we want the school to know the process for how to refer that crisis situation through the BHT so that they can get the necessary supports for any affected students. So that protocol mapping is part of what we want to see come out of this process. And so there's many models for how that mapping looks. We intend to seek out other partnerships, talking to Lurie Children's Hospital as an example, working with other subject matter experts like Dr. Bashiri Keels from University of Chicago to make sure that we're incorporating the best practices as we look at these police alternatives if schools do end up voting out their police. And even if they don't, we want to make sure that we have the right protocols in place, especially in light of the Healing Centered initiative, where we are putting a higher focus on the behavioral health team. And let me just say one thing about that, and it wasn't explicitly asked so far in any of the questions, but one of the big things as part of the Healing Centered initiative is making sure through the Office of Social Emotional Learning that more of our schools are getting their safe and supportive school certifications. And so a lot of the work that's being done in the whole school safety planning process for these high schools will help those schools get their credit towards that certification. And so if we're doing this right, which is our goal, then by doing this analysis, by reflecting on your strategies and what you need, hopefully the goal would be that your school will then, if it hasn't already, will achieve the safe and supportive school certification.
Thank you, Chief, for that, and for bringing that out. You're right. Nobody has called that out, so thank you for sharing that with us and letting us know that that's happening. Thank you, Yana. Hopefully, I said your name right for the question. I appreciate it. And I know we're running out of time a little bit. There is one question in Spanish that I want to read out, and then I'll translate it for you, Chief. And it says, ¿Qué pasa cuando las personas de safe passage no cuidan y están platicando con otras personas? So her question is, what happens when the folks from Safe Passage are not doing their job? They're kind of just hanging out or talking to people. What happens? Who can she call? What can we do?
Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to give you a phone number to call, and we want to know as soon as you see it. So if you are driving by, I know our partners who run the Safe Passage program, the community-based organizations that we work with, do not want that happening. And so if you see it, please contact our safety center, and I'll give the number out, and Bernice can also distribute this out. It's 773-553-3335. It's the Student Safety Center. If you can be as specific as you can in terms of what corner or intersection that you are observing the situation, as well as what time of day and what day of week. So as specific as you can, that will help us narrow down what needs corrective action. And we take that concern that you just raised extremely seriously. And so we ask for your support. If you know that is happening, if you see that is happening, please let us know as soon as you possibly can, so we can take necessary corrective action. It does us no good to have safe passage workers there who are not taking this seriously, who are not supporting the safety of our children. And so thank you for raising that. And please help us by letting us know if you see any of that.
Yeah, thank you, Chief, for that. And Diana, who had the question, thank you for sharing that. I did put the phone number on the chat so you guys can have it, and we will also send it in the follow-up email. Like I said, as we're running out of time, so Chief, before we end our discussion today, you gave us a lot of really good information, a lot of food for thought for us as parents, and I know there's a lot of LSC members who join us today. What are the three main, but all you said, which is super important, three main things that you want us to remember as we leave today's session?
Thank you. So I'll say it, and I don't know if these are in any particular order. I think the first thing is the whole school safety process is very new. We're really seeking this process to be transformational and really helping our schools, our school community stakeholders, our principals, our staff, and most importantly, our young people see that we're trying to make a change on how we see school safety. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we heard you loud and clear. So the stakeholders who spoke out over the past year or two, we're really trying to make this process work so that it is a fair, equitable, and really essentially appropriate process to help us identify a whole school safety plan that's in the best interest of our children. And the last thing is, for everyone who is on here today, thank you so much for joining and taking the time. I would really ask you to continue to be engaged. If you are at a school that has a school resource officer program, one of the high schools, please, by all means, get involved. Attend meetings when they happen, get involved with your local school council members, let them know how you feel, but let your school's leadership know how you feel so that your input can be incorporated into the whole school safety plan. And if you have students that are at these schools, please encourage them to get involved. It is their voices that we want to hear the loudest. And so, you know, that's probably the most important thing that I want to add today is we can't do this without you. And so thank you so much for being engaged and for caring so much about this topic.
No, thank you, Chief, for that. We really, as parents, I really appreciate you saying that for us to be involved, especially for our kids, right, our teenagers that have a voice to be involved and let us know. So with that, we're going to finish today's session. Thank you, everybody, like Chief said, for joining us and giving us time in this afternoon. I think it stopped raining, so hopefully it's getting nicer. But thank you everybody for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next week for our next session. Chief, thank you so much for giving us your time and your expertise. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bernice, and thank you again, everybody.
Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.